I'm Heath Lambert, and you're listening to Marked by Grace, a podcast applying the grace of Jesus to all of life. How young is too young for someone to date? That's the question on the podcast this week. Thank you for joining me here at Marked by Grace. If you've got a question you'd like me to answer, you can send it into markedbygrace at fbcjacks.com. That's Marked by Grace at fbcjacks.com. We get a lot of questions about Christian dating, about singleness and marriage, a lot of questions. I can't take all of them, but I wanted to take this one this week. And the question very specifically is, how young is a person before they're too young to date? So let's say, hey, you're 30 years old, and is it okay to date somebody who's 25? Is it okay to date somebody who's 20? Is it okay to date somebody who's 19? I have some people here as I record the podcast who are making very uncomfortable, squirmy faces as I ask that question, and that's because this gets uncomfortable real quick. That's actually the reason it is a good question. So when do you cross the line and have a person be too young to be a candidate for you to date? Well, listen, I need to be very honest with you. This is not a question that the Bible addresses with specificity. It doesn't mean the Bible doesn't talk about it. It doesn't mean the Bible doesn't give us guidance and issues to think through. It does mean there's not a chapter and verse in the Bible that you can turn to and read, thou shalt not date someone who's 10 years younger than you are, or thou shalt only allow yourself to be pursued by someone who's less than 8 years older than you are. That kind of specific guidance is not in the Bible, but I think there's some rules of thumb that we can think through. And I'm going to give you 3 rules of thumb to help answer this question and give you some guidance about something where there isn't a concrete number of years that is the acceptable age gap. Here's the first rule of thumb. I'll call it the legal rule of thumb. So the reality is, I'm recording this in the United States of America in Jacksonville, Florida. And in Florida, like in most regions of the country, there are rules about age gap. So in the state of Florida, for example, it is illegal for there to be any kind of relationship like this between, say, a 22-year-old and a 15-year-old. Now, to be really clear, most of these laws don't speak about dating, but they speak about sexual contact. And so in one sense, you could say, well, hey, there's a little bit of a distinction there, and there is a little bit of a distinction there, but come on. I'm obviously against all kinds of sexual immorality. I'm against all kinds of sins in the fornication department, that is sex before you get married. But as true as that is, I think we can all agree that it is unwise and wrong to enter into a dating relationship with somebody that you're not even legally able to marry and therefore legally not able to have a sexual relationship with. And so this legal rule of thumb is important. It changes. So the same 21-year-old that is not able to be involved with a 15-year-old, that same person, when they are 41, would have no difficulty pursuing somebody who was 35, if you just fast forward a decade or two. But that legal rule of thumb does mean that age gaps matter more on the young end of life than on the older end of life. And I think we can just say, hey, a person who is too young for you to marry, a person who is too young for you to, after that, have a sexual relationship with, is a person who's too young for you to date. That's the legal rule of thumb. Second is the comfort rule of thumb. And this is just very subjective. This is, everybody gets to decide who they are comfortable dating and who they are not comfortable dating. I had a guy I knew come up to me and asked me if it was okay for him to date a woman that was 12 years younger than he is. Now, um, there was no legal issue there. Everybody was up above the age of consent and all that kind of thing. So there was no legal issue. But I just started asking him about his level of comfort. I started asking him about what he thought about this age gap. And as we talked, he was like, you know what? I actually don't feel comfortable dating someone who's that much younger than I am. And so he moved away from that relationship. That comfort rule can change. A little bit of a funny story if you have the strength to bear it. Back, I don't know, it was probably 10 years ago or so. I was trying to get a man who is my age involved in a dating relationship with a girl that I thought was great. She was about 7 years younger than he was, so therefore about 7 years younger than I was because we were the same age. And I thought they were great. I thought they'd make a great couple. And so I go to this girl, and I was there with my wife, and I said, hey, how old is too old for you to date? And she thought for a second, and she said, oh, I don't know, but I wouldn't want to date anybody as old as you. And I was like, I totally missed the point that she just told me that this guy I wanted to get hooked up with she just ruled him out of bounds. And I was personally offended. I was like, I'm not that old. I'm 7 years older than you are. I mean, come on. But she just was looking at somebody who was old and washed up like me, married with kids. And she didn't think that was reasonable. Well, then here's what happened. She got to know that guy, and she actually liked him. And the 7-year age gap that in theory seemed like too much, all of a sudden when you got to know somebody, hey, I can live with this. And so the comfort rule of thumb is subjective. It can change. They, by the way, didn't wind up together. But I'm just demonstrating that what you feel comfortable with today might be a little bit different than you'll feel comfortable with tomorrow. And by the way, you need to be very careful as a Christian not to judge people who make different decisions about you than this. There are some people who would feel very comfortable marrying somebody who's much older than you would ever feel comfortable marrying. But as long as they're not in violation of any law or any biblical principle, you can leave that up to their Christian freedom. There's a legal rule of thumb. There's the comfort rule of thumb. Here's the last one I'll mention. There's the relational rule of thumb. And here's what I'm talking about. Anybody who's dating needs to be involved in close relationships with other people that are not candidates for them to date. Anybody who's involved in the dating world, you need to have older, wiser, sane Christians that are able to speak into your life and who you are willing to listen to. And there's just a million different issues of wisdom and prudence that don't have to do with the violation of a biblical principle, but you need to listen to the wisdom of people who are speaking into your life, who are just going to see things that you don't see, who are going to come at things from a place of greater sobriety than you're going to have in it's just a more emotional season of life to be dating somebody. And listen, we could imagine a couple that's interested in one another, and there is a significant age gap, and there's not a legal problem, there's not a comfort problem, but the people who know you best are going to look at you and go, hey, you don't want to date somebody that's this much older than you. Or, hey, you don't want to date somebody that's this much younger than you. Is it a crime? No. Is it a sin? No. But let me tell you what we're seeing here that is going to be a problem. Listen, you don't have to listen to the advice and recommendation of everybody in your life, but you need to be primed to listen to it. And if you're going to object to the wise advice of people who know you and love you, you need to have a really good reason to do it. And you need to know you're taking a real risk by walking past that wisdom. So this question is a little bit more complicated than it first appears, simply because there is not a chapter and verse that gives a very, very clear line. But these rules of thumb can help us navigate a complex situation, and I hope they're a help to you.